You're not family anymore. You're a liability. Now get your stuff and get off my property before I call someone to remove you." That was my brother, standing in the front hall of the house we both grew up in his socks, holding a mug of our father's coffee like the kettle still belonged to him, like the air did. I'd come straight from the cemetery in Dundas. There was still wet grass stuck to the heel of my one good pair of boots. We'd buried our dad 4 hours earlier, and I was holding the folded program from the service in my coat pocket. I could feel the corner of it digging into my hip, and my brother was telling me I was a liability. My name is Nora Quinlan. I'm 31. And the week my father died was the week I found out how little I understood about the people I'd spent my whole life loving. I didn't argue with him. That's the part I keep coming back to. People always think they'd fight, that they'd plant their feet and demand answers. But grief does something strange to you. It hollows you out. You go quiet in a way that isn't peace. It's just the absence of anything left to say. So I went upstairs and I put my things into the same duffel bag I'd brought when I came home to help with hospice, and I walked out past my sister-in-law, who wouldn't look at me, and I got in my car and I drove until I ran out of road to drive on. I ended up at a motel out near the 403, one of those low brick ones with a flickering vaccine sign and a vending machine that only took coins. $49 a night plus tax. I remember the woman at the desk had a little space heater going by her feet and a Tim Hortons cup gone cold beside the keyboard, and she looked at me the way people look at you when they can tell you've been crying, but they have the decency not to say anything. She gave me room 11 and told me checkout was at 11, and I thought, of course, 11 and 11, as if the universe was being tidy about it. I sat on the edge of that bed for a long time. The bedspread was the color of weak tea. Outside, transport trucks went by on the highway in long, slow exhales, and every set of headlights swept across the ceiling like something searching. And the thing that wouldn't leave me alone, the thing that kept circling back no matter how tired I got, was this: it didn't make sense. My father was not a careless man. Daniel Quinlan built Quinlan Freight from a single leased truck and a phone in a kitchen drawer into a distribution company that ran routes through the whole Golden Horseshoe and up past Barrie that employed close to 200 people, that other men in the industry talked about with a kind of grudging respect. He did not leave things to chance. He labeled the boxes in the garage. He kept the cottage's septic records in a binder with tabs. When my mother got sick, 8 years before, he'd had everything arranged so quietly and so completely that she never had to think about a single bill in the worst year of her life. That was who he was. He planned. He protected. So why would he hand the entire thing, the company, the house, the money, all of it, somewhere near $38 million when you counted the property and the holdings, to my brother and leave me with nothing, not a note? Not a keepsake. Nothing. It wasn't even that I wanted the money. I want to be honest about that because I think it matters. I had a life. I was a logistics coordinator, which is a fancy way of saying I spent my 20s learning the family business from the inside out, dispatch and routing and the brutal arithmetic of fuel costs and driver hours. I'd been doing it at Dad's company since I was 19, weekends and summers and then full-time. My brother had done 4 years at a brokerage in Toronto and come back when the bonuses dried up. I knew the floor. I knew the drivers by their kids' names. The idea that I'd built nothing, earned nothing, mattered nothing, that's what kept me up. Not the inheritance. The erasure. Around 2 in the morning, I went out to my car for the box. I'd grabbed it on my way out of the house without really deciding to. It was sitting on the floor of Dad's study, an old Molson case he'd repurposed years ago, and I'd hauled it to the car on instinct, the way you grab a photo album when the house is on fire. I brought it back into room 11 and dumped it out on that tea-colored bedspread and started going through it under the lamp. It was mostly nothing. Old route maps, a warranty card for a furnace we'd replaced in 2009, a birthday card I'd made him when I was maybe 7, with a truck drawn on it in marker. I had to stop for a minute when I found that. And then, near the bottom, a manila envelope with a law firm's name printed in the corner. Macaulay, Dwyer, and Sandhue. Barristers and solicitors, with an address on James Street North in Hamilton. And in my father's handwriting, in the blue felt pen he always used, across the front, Nora, read everything. Don't take anyone's word for it. I sat there holding it with my hand shaking, and I realized I was hearing his voice, not from the envelope, from a memory. The last real conversation we'd had, maybe 10 days before the end, when he was still lucid in the mornings before the medication pulled him under. He'd taken my wrist. His grip was still so strong that surprised me, and he'd said, "Nora, when this is over, things are going to look one way and be another. Promise me you'll ask the questions." And I'd thought he was confused. I'd squeezed his hand and said, "Okay, Dad, okay, the way you do." And I'd gone to make him toast. He didn't eat. He wasn't confused. He was telling me something, and I'd been too busy losing him to listen. Inside the envelope was a single sheet, a letter, brief, on the firm's letterhead, dated 3 weeks before he died. It said that the writer, a Mr. Edmund Dwyer, had had the pleasure of representing my father for over 20 years, that my father had given instructions regarding his estate, and that should I ever have questions about those instructions, I was to contact the office directly and reference my father's file. And that I should not, the word was underlined, should not rely on any account of the will given to me by another party. I didn't sleep after that. I sat by the window and watched the highway go pale, then gray, then the color of dishwater, and the second the sun was up, I was on the phone. The office didn't open until 9. I called at 9001. By 10, I was driving into Hamilton. Down the mountain access, with the whole city laid out flat and gray below me, and the lake a thin silver line at the edge of it. And by 10:30, I was sitting in a waiting room on the 4th floor of a building on James Street North, with a bad coffee from the place downstairs going cold in my hand, exactly like the woman at the motel desk. Mr. Dwyer was older than I pictured. 70s, maybe. Soft, white hair, a cardigan under his suit jacket, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He had the kind of face that had spent 50 years watching people receive news they weren't ready for, and had learned to be gentle about it. He took one look at me when I came in, and something moved across his face. Relief, I think. "Nora," he said, "not Ms. Quinlan. Nora." Like he already knew me. "I'd hoped you'd come. I wasn't certain you would. My brother says Dad left everything to him," I said. I practiced the sentence in the car. It came out steadier than I felt. "The company, the house, all of it. I just need to understand why. And here is the part I will remember until I'm an old woman myself." Mr. Dwyer took off his reading glasses, and he folded them, and he set them on the desk, and he looked at me for a long moment, and then he laughed. Not unkindly. It was a tired, almost sad laugh, the laugh of a man who has watched a thing he expected come true. "He told me you wouldn't have read it," he said. "Your father. He said she'll be too busy grieving to ask, and her brother will count on exactly that." He shook his head slowly. "Nora, did you ever actually see your father's will? Did anyone show it to you? Or did you take your brother's word?" The room went very quiet. The radiator ticked. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang and stopped. I hadn't. Of course I hadn't. There'd been a viewing, then the funeral, then the front hall, then the highway. There had been no reading of any will. My brother had simply stood there in our father's house and told me what it said, and I had believed him, the way you believe the people you grow up with, on reflex, because the alternative is a kind of cold I wasn't ready to feel. "No," I said. My voice cracked on the one syllable. "No, I never saw it." Mr. Dwyer nodded, like that confirmed something, and reached into a drawer and laid a bound document on the desk between us and turned it around so it faced me. Then let me be the first to actually show it to you, he said, because what your brother told you is not true. It was never true, and your father knew 3 weeks before he died that this exact morning was coming. I want to tell you I read it carefully, clause by clause, like a lawyer. I didn't. My eyes went down the page, snatching at words, the way you do when your heart is going too fast to let you think, and they caught on a line near the top of the second section, in plain bold type, and I read it 3 times before it meant anything. The primary beneficiary of the estate of Daniel Robert Quinlan is his daughter, Nora Elizabeth Quinlan. His daughter, me. That's not possible, I heard myself say. It came out as a whisper. My brother said, I know what your brother said. Mr. Dwyer's voice was very even, very kind, and underneath the kindness there was something hard, something that had been waiting. I'd like you to listen carefully, because your father built this so that the truth could not be argued with, only obeyed or broken. May I explain it? I nodded. I couldn't have spoken. Your father did not divide the estate down the middle, he said. He thought about it for a long time and he decided against it. And I'll be honest with you. I argued with him. I thought it was harsh. He said it wasn't about harshness, it was about knowing. He tapped the page. He left the estate to you as primary beneficiary, but he placed your brother in temporary control, executor with operational authority over the company for a period of 90 days following his death. Full access. The house, the accounts, the chair at the head of the table, everything your brother believed he'd inherited, your father handed it to him on purpose. I didn't understand. I said so. Because it was a test, Mr. Dwyer said simply. There was a condition attached to that control. Your brother could keep operational authority, and the estate would convert to him in full at the end of the 90 days on one condition. That during those 90 days, he honor your father's commitments. Specifically, that he maintain the workforce, no mass layoffs, no asset stripping of the company your father built with those people, and that he provide for you, keep you in your role, keep you in the home, treat you as family. He let that sit. Your father's exact phrasing was, let's see what he does with power when he thinks no one's keeping score. The floor seemed to tilt under me. I gripped the arms of the chair. And if he failed the condition, I asked. But I already knew. I'd known since the front hall, since the word liability, I just hadn't had the shape of it yet. Then control reverts immediately, Mr. Dwyer said, and the estate passes to you fully and permanently. No 90 days, no second chance. The clause is automatic. He paused. Nora, has your brother thrown you out of the house? Yesterday, I said, 4 hours after the funeral. And the company. Has he done anything at the company? And that was when it all came back to me. The things I'd half heard and not understood in the fog of the last 2 days. My phone had been buzzing all morning and I'd been ignoring it. The dispatch supervisor, a man who'd worked for my dad for 19 years, had texted me at 6 a.m. Nora, call me. Something's wrong. They're saying there's a meeting. They're saying layoffs. And another driver, one of the older guys. Is it true they're selling the Barrie terminal? My father's whole northern lane, the routes he'd fought for, the contracts he'd shaken hands on. I told Mr. Dwyer. I watched him write it down. 3 days, he said quietly, almost to himself. He couldn't even hold it together for 3 days. He set down his pen and looked at me, and there was a gentleness in it that nearly undid me, because it was the gentleness of someone who had loved my father too. Your dad used to say that control isn't ownership. He said anybody can hold a thing. The question is what they do with it when they think it's theirs and nobody's watching. He folded his hands. Your brother showed us exactly what he is. He just didn't know it was being recorded. I sat there and I felt a lot of things at once, and I'm not going to pretend they were all noble. There was grief still, underneath everything, a constant low tide. There was a kind of vindication that frightened me with how good it felt. And there was something else, something cold and clear and steady that I didn't recognize at first, and then did. It was my father's. It was the thing in him that labeled the boxes and tapped the binder and never left anything to chance. I'd inherited that too. It had just been waiting. What do you need from me? I said. Proof of the violations, Mr. Dwyer said. Documented. The eviction. The layoffs, the sale of assets. We need to establish that the conditions were broken and then the transfer is frankly mechanical. I'll handle the law. But Nora, he leaned forward. I want to be sure you want this. Once I file, there is no putting it back together. Your relationship with your brother, whatever's left of it, this will end it. I've seen families do this. I've seen them regret it. So I'm going to ask you plainly, is this what you want? I thought about the front hall. I thought about my sister-in-law not looking at me. I thought about the dispatch supervisor texting me at 6 in the morning, scared for his job, scared for the men under him, because my brother had decided that the fastest way to turn our father's life's work into cash was to take it apart. I thought about 200 people. I thought about my mother, gone now too, and how my father had protected her so completely that she never saw a single bill. He didn't just throw me out, I said. He's selling the thing Dad spent 40 years building. He's putting people I know out of work so he can cash out faster. The money isn't even the point. I looked at the old lawyer. Yes, I want it. File it. The proof was almost embarrassingly easy to gather because my brother had never imagined he'd need to defend himself. He'd sent me the text himself. Take whatever's yours and don't come back. This is my house now. At 4047 the previous afternoon, time-stamped in writing. There was the front door camera, the one Dad had installed after the break-in at the neighbors, which had caught the whole thing. Me on the porch with my duffel bag, my brother in the doorway in his socks. And there were the company records, the layoff notices already drafted under his name, the listing agreement for the Barrie terminal that he'd signed 2 days after the funeral, his signature still wet on a building our father had nearly bankrupted himself to buy in 1998. It took Mr. Barrie, Dwyer 11 days to do what 11 days of law does. I spent them in room 11 of that motel, then in a furnished sublet downtown, fielding calls from the company that I technically had no authority to answer yet, telling drivers to hold on, telling the dispatch supervisor I couldn't explain but to please not let anyone sign anything, to stall the terminal sale however he could. He didn't ask why. He'd worked for my father for 19 years. He trusted the name. And then, on a gray Thursday in late November, with the first real snow coming down and fat, wet flakes that didn't stick, Mr. Dwyer called and said it was done. The condition was found violated. The clause had triggered. The estate was mine. There's one more thing, he said. Legally, your brother has to be informed and the property formally transferred. I usually send a letter. But given the circumstances, he paused. Some people find it helps to be there, to close the door themselves, so to speak. It's your choice. You don't owe him that. I went. I want to tell you I went because of something dignified. The truth is, I went because I needed him to know that I knew, that I'd seen the whole thing, that the sister he'd called a liability in our dead father's front hall had not, in fact, meant nothing. We drove out to Dundas in 2 cars, Mr. Van. Dwyer and a younger associate in one, me following behind, and the snow kept coming down soft and wet over the escarpment, over the old stone houses, over the cemetery where my parents were both lying now under the same gray sky. The porch light was on when we pulled into the driveway. Of course it was. My father had wired it to a timer years ago because he could never remember to turn it off, and my brother, in 3 days of acting like the master of the house, hadn't figured out how to change a single thing about it. I knocked on my own front door. I heard him before I saw him. Heavy, quick footsteps, the confident kind. A man who still thought the house was his. He opened the door with a look on his face that was halfway to a complaint. And then he saw me, and behind me the 2 men in dark coats with a folder and the snow falling. And his expression went through about 4 things in 2 seconds and landed on something I'd never once seen on my brother's face in 31 years. Fear. "What is this?" he said. His voice came out wrong, too high. Mr. Dwyer stepped forward, calm as a Sunday. "Good afternoon. We're here regarding the estate of Nora Quinlan. May we come in? It's cold." My brother didn't move out of the doorway. "It's been handled. Everything's settled. I don't know what she's told you." "She's told us nothing we didn't already know, Mr. Teald," Dwyer said, and the gentleness was gone now, replaced by something flat and final. He held out the folder. "I'd suggest you read this rather than have me summarize it on the step, but I'm happy to summarize it on the step." My brother took the folder. I watched his hands as he opened it. I watched them start to shake. I watched the color go out of his face, the way it goes out of a sky when the sun drops behind the escarpment, all at once, gray to grayer. "This is wrong," he said. "This is, Dad left everything to me. He told me." He sat me down. "Your father gave you 90 days of control," Mr. Dwyer said, "on the condition that you maintain the company's workforce and provide for your sister. You issued layoff notices to 41 employees. You signed an agreement to sell the Berry terminal, and you removed your sister from this home 4 hours after the funeral and put it in writing." He let each one land like a separate stone dropped into water. "You didn't fail by a little, son. You failed by everything. The estate has reverted to its primary beneficiary." He nodded at me, once. "Your sister." My brother looked up from the folder. He looked at me, and it was such a strange thing, because for 1 second I saw him as he'd been when we were kids, before any of this, when he taught me to skate on the pond behind the cottage and held my mittens while I fell down over and over and laughed. For 1 second he was just my brother, and then his face changed and the man in our father's doorway came back. "You did this," he said to me. "You went behind my back." "I read the will," I said. That stopped him. 2 days of rage and the word liability and all of it, and that one sentence stopped him cold because he understood it. He understood exactly what it meant. He'd been counting on me not to. He'd looked at his grieving sister and seen someone too soft and too sad to ask a single question, and he had built his whole theft on that one assumption, and it turned out our father had built something better and quieter and harder underneath it, and had handed me the key 3 weeks before he died because he knew his own son. "Nora." My brother's voice dropped, changed, the rage draining out of it so fast it left him swaying in the doorway. "Nora, listen. Wait. We can figure this out. We can split it, okay? 50-50, like it should have been, like we're family. You and me, we're all that's left." His eyes were wet now. I don't know if it was real. I've thought about that a lot since, whether it was real. I was in a bad spot. You don't know. The brokerage, I owe people. My wife doesn't even know how much. I panicked. Okay, I made a mistake, but we can fix this. We don't have to do it like this. And there it was. The truth, finally, blurted out on the step in the snow. He owed people. He'd panicked. He'd looked at $38 million and 40 years of our father's life and seen a way out of his own hole, and he'd taken it, and he'd been willing to put 41 families out of work to do it faster. I felt the cold, clear, steady thing in me, my father's thing, hold absolutely still. "You called me a liability," I said, in Dad's front hall. With his coffee in your hand, you told me I wasn't family anymore. I wasn't shouting. I want you to understand that. I have never in my life felt calmer than I did saying it. You didn't make a mistake. A mistake is forgetting someone's birthday. You looked at me 4 hours after we put our father in the ground, and you made a choice. "I was grieving," he said. "Nora, I was grieving. I wasn't thinking. So was I." He didn't have anything for that. There isn't anything for that. The younger associate stepped forward then, very politely, and explained the timeline for vacating the property. The same flat, professional kindness, And my brother stood there in his socks holding the folder and didn't seem to hear any of it. His wife came to the top of the stairs and looked down at all of us and then looked at her husband, and something passed between them that I wasn't part of and didn't want to be. And she went back down the hall without a word. I didn't stay to watch him pack. I'd thought I'd want to. I'd imagined it. Those 11 days, standing in the front hall the way he had, arms crossed, watching him carry his bags out into the snow. But when it came to it, I didn't want it at all. There was no pleasure in it. He was a small, frightened man in our dead father's house, and watching him would have made me smaller too, and I'd had enough of being made small. I went and stood in the backyard instead, in the snow, by the spot where the pond used to freeze, and I let it fall on me for a while. Here is what I did in the end, and I'm telling you not because it makes me good, but because it's the part of the story that actually mattered. I didn't sell the company. I called off the terminal sale the next morning, the contract still inside the window to cancel, and I drove to the yard and I stood up on the loading dock in front of 200 people in their work boots and their toques. The dispatch supervisor beside me with his arms crossed and his eyes suspiciously bright, and I told them the layoffs were rescinded. All 41. I told them whose daughter I was and what my father had built and what I intended to keep building. And a man near the back who'd driven for my dad for 22 years started clapping. Just him, slow, and then it spread. And I had to look at the concrete for a minute so I wouldn't lose it in front of everyone. I gave my brother nothing. People ask me about that. The few people I've told. They get a careful look on their faces and they say, "But he's your only brother," as though that's an argument. As though blood is a debt you owe, no matter what the person does with it. I thought about it. I'm not a monster. I thought about it for weeks. But every time I came back to the same place, he'd made his choice in the front hall with his eyes open, and a person who would do that once will tell you who they are if you let them. And my father had spent his whole life teaching me to believe people when they show you. So I let him stay disowned. He disowned me first, 4 hours after the funeral. I just made it official. He paid his debts, I heard later, by selling the condo in Toronto and the boat he should never have bought. His wife left within the year. We don't speak. I'm at peace with that in a way I didn't expect to be. The will didn't make my father right about everything. He could be hard and stubborn, and he'd built that whole brutal test instead of just sitting his 2 children down and telling them the truth, which is its own kind of cowardice, the kind that hides inside being clever. I've made my peace with that too, but he understood one thing completely, the thing he tried to tell me with his hand around my wrist 10 days before the end, the thing I was too broken to hear. Things are going to look one way and be another. Ask the questions. People think the lesson of a story like mine is about money or about revenge, and it isn't, not really. The money was never the point. My brother thought our father's estate was a pile of things to be owned, and so the moment he believed it was his, he started selling it for parts. He couldn't help it. It was who he was. And our father knew that the only way to find out who deserved to carry the thing forward was to hand each of us the keys for a little while and see what we did when we thought no one was keeping score. I keep the porch light on the timer. I never did fix it. Some nights when I pull into the driveway and it's flickering the way it always has, the way it did the night he threw me out, I sit in the car for a second before I go in, and I think about my father, and I think about the box on the floor of his study and the blue felt pen, and 4 words on a manila envelope that turned a homeless, gutted, grieving woman into the person she was always supposed to be. Read everything. Don't take anyone's word for it. I never have since, and I never will again. People assume the part of my story that should haunt me is the betrayal. My brother in our father's front hall. The word liability still warm in his mouth 4 hours after we lowered the casket. It doesn't. What I think about on the long, quiet drives home down the escarpment is how close I came to letting it stand. I almost didn't ask. I almost took my brother's word and disappeared into a motel and a smaller life, because grief makes you small and tired and willing to believe the loudest voice in the room. That's the thing nobody warns you about. Cruelty doesn't usually win because it's strong. It wins because the rest of us are exhausted. What saved me wasn't luck, and it wasn't the will sitting in Edmund Dwyer's drawer. It was a habit my father planted in me long before he died, the one written across that envelope in blue felt pen. Don't take anyone's word for it. He wasn't really talking about paperwork. He was talking about the discipline of seeing a thing clearly even when looking hurts, of asking the hard question when every part of you wants to lie down. My brother lost everything, not because he was unlucky, but because of who he chose to be the moment he believed no one was watching. And I kept everything not because I was owed it, but because I made myself think when thinking was the last thing I had strength for. And it did take strength. I want to be honest about that because it's the part people skip. Knocking on my own front door with 2 lawyers behind me in the snow, standing on a loading dock the next morning to tell 200 frightened people they still had jobs. None of that came from anger. Anger is cheap and it runs out fast. What carried me was steadier, the same thing that kept my dad up at night reading the fine print. The refusal to quit on the people who'd done nothing wrong, including the version of myself I'd nearly given up on in room 11. I gave my brother nothing and I sleep fine. I thought there'd be guilt. But you can't keep handing your trust to someone who has shown you, plainly, what he'll do with it. Believing people when they show you who they are isn't coldness. It's the only honest kind of love there is. So if you take anything from what happened to me, let it be this. Be the kind of person who does right when no one's keeping score, because someone always is, even if it's only you. Keep your head clear when the world wants you blurry. And when you're at the bottom of it, in the cheap motel with the highway going by, find the one small reason to stand up anyway. That's where everything I have now started. On the edge of a tea-colored bed, holding an envelope, deciding to ask,